The wedding dress was supposed to be ivory, not the sickly yellow it had become overnight. I stood in the bridal suite at the Grandview Country Club, staring at my reflection in the floor-length mirror, my hands trembling as I touched the fabric that had somehow been soaked in what could only be turmeric water. The stains spread across the bodice like a disease, impossible to hide, impossible to fix with 3 hours until my ceremony. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. "Oh my God, Sarah!" My maid of honor, Jessica, burst through the door, her face pale. "I just heard from the caterers. Half the centerpieces are missing, and they're saying the flowers you ordered were changed to funeral arrangements. White lilies and chrysanthemums everywhere." My vision blurred, but not from tears of joy. This was the third accident this week. After my wedding cake mysteriously collapsed during delivery yesterday, and the string quartet canceled at the last minute, claiming they'd received a call saying the wedding was postponed. There was only one person who knew all my vendors, who had access to my bridal suite, who could orchestrate this level of calculated destruction. "Where's Emma?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. Jessica's silence told me everything. My twin sister, my identical twin sister, who'd been my maid of honor until last month, was nowhere to be found on the morning of my wedding. The same sister who'd smiled and wished me luck when I'd announced my engagement to Marcus. The same sister who'd helped me plan every detail of this day for the past year. The same sister who I'd caught texting my fiancé at 2 a.m. last Tuesday. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, I want to take a moment to thank you for watching. Creating and narrating these detailed, novel-length stories takes tremendous time and research to bring you the most engaging content possible. We're embarking on a journey of nearly 50,000 words together. That's a full novella. If you're already hooked by what you've heard, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing this story with someone who would enjoy it, and subscribing to the channel. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest stories. This is going to be an epic adventure, so get comfortable and let's continue with this remarkable tale. 6 months earlier, everything had been perfect. Marcus Williams had proposed to me on a snowy Christmas Eve, dropping to one knee in our childhood home's living room while our families watched with tears in their eyes. Emma had been the first to congratulate us, wrapping us both in a fierce hug and whispering, "I'm so happy for you, Sarah. You deserve this." We'd been inseparable since birth. 26 years of shared secrets, switched identities, and fierce loyalty. While we looked identical, our personalities couldn't have been more different. I was the planner, the organizer, the one who colored inside the lines. Emma was spontaneous, charming, the one who could talk her way out of any situation. Growing up, we'd joked that we were two halves of the same person, and for most of our lives, that had felt true. The engagement period had been a whirlwind of wedding planning, with Emma enthusiastically taking on the role of maid of honor. She'd helped me find the perfect venue, taste test dozens of cakes, and interview photographers. Marcus often joked that he was marrying both of us, given how involved Emma was in every decision. "Are you sure you don't mind her being so present?" Marcus had asked one evening after Emma had spent 4 hours with us at the florist, debating the merits of peonies versus roses. "She's my twin," I'd laughed, curled up against his side on our apartment couch. "We've never done anything major without each other. Besides, she's just excited for us." Marcus had nodded, but I'd caught something in his expression, a flicker of something I couldn't quite read. At the time, I'd dismissed it as pre-wedding jitters. Looking back, I should have paid more attention. The first crack in our perfect twin dynamic appeared 3 months before the wedding. I'd arrived at Emma's apartment unannounced, wanting to surprise her with coffee and pastries from our favorite bakery. Using my spare key, I'd let myself in, calling her name as I walked through the familiar space we'd decorated together after she'd graduated from law school. I'd found her in her bedroom, but she wasn't alone. David Chen, her boyfriend of 2 years, was there, along with his suitcase. "We need to talk," David had said, his usually cheerful demeanor replaced by something cold and distant. "This isn't working, Emma. It hasn't been working for months." Quote, I'd frozen in the doorway, clutching the coffee carrier, watching my twin sister's face crumble as David explained that he'd met someone else. Someone who didn't need constant attention and validation. Someone who didn't compete with her twin sister for every moment of his time. "You've never been able to be in a relationship where you weren't the center of the universe," David had said, his words cutting deep. "And lately, it's like you're not even present. Your mind is always somewhere else, on someone else." After David left, Emma had broken down completely. I'd held her as she sobbed, her tears soaking through my sweater, her body shaking with the force of her grief. She'd cried for hours, alternating between rage and devastation, while I stroked her hair and promised her that everything would be okay. "I don't understand," she'd whispered against my shoulder. "I thought we were happy. I thought he loved me." "He did love you," I'd assured her. "Sometimes people just grow apart. It doesn't mean you did anything wrong." But even as I comforted her, I'd noticed something troubling. When Emma cried, she usually became blotchy and swollen, her face a mess of tears and emotion. That day, even in her deepest despair, she'd remained somehow composed, beautiful, even, like she was performing grief rather than experiencing it. I'd pushed the thought away, hating myself for doubting my sister's pain. She was hurting, and I was there to support her. That's what twins did. The second crack appeared a month later, at our cousin Lisa's birthday party. The whole family was there, celebrating at the same country club where I'd soon be married. Emma had seemed different that night, more animated than she'd been since the breakup, flirting with every available man and drinking more than usual. "She's just trying to get back out there," our mother had said when I'd expressed concern. "It's healthy. She needs to move on from David." But it wasn't her flirtation that bothered me. It was the way she'd focused her attention on Marcus. All evening she'd found excuses to touch his arm, to lean close when she talked to him, to pull him away from conversations with other people. When the DJ had played our song "Can't Help Myself" by the Four Tops, Emma had grabbed Marcus's hand and insisted they dance. "Come on, future brother-in-law," she'd laughed, her voice carrying across the dance floor. "Sarah won't mind, we're practically the same person anyway." Quote. I'd watch them dance, something cold settling in my stomach as I noticed how perfectly they moved together, how Marcus's hand seemed to linger on Emma's waist, how she'd thrown her head back and laughed at something he'd whispered in her ear. They looked like a couple. They looked like they belonged together. "You okay?" Jessica had appeared beside me, following my gaze to the dance floor. "Fine," I'd lied, forcing a smile. "Just thinking about how weird it'll be when Emma and I don't see each other every day anymore." "What do you mean?" "After the wedding, Marcus and I moved to Chicago for his job. Emma will be here, and we'll be 3 hours away. We've never been apart for more than a week in our entire lives." Jessica had squeezed my arm. "It'll be an adjustment, but you'll both be fine. Besides, absence makes the heart grow fonder, right?" I nodded, but as I watched Emma spin in Marcus's arms, I'd wondered if absence might make some hearts grow fonder of the wrong person. The third and final crack appeared 2 weeks ago, when I'd found the text messages. Marcus had been in the shower and his phone had been buzzing incessantly on our nightstand. Thinking it might be work, he'd been putting in long hours to clear his schedule for our honeymoon. I'd glanced at the screen to see if it was urgent. The messages were from Emma. "Can't stop thinking about last night. Sarah doesn't have to know. You felt it too, didn't you? This thing between us? She's asleep. Call me." My hands had shaken as I'd scrolled through weeks of messages, dozens of them, sent late at night and early in the morning when I'd been sleeping or at work. Flirtatious messages. Intimate messages. Messages that spoke of secret meetings and shared touches and promises to be careful. Messages that revealed my twin sister and my fiancé had been having an emotional affair for months. I'd screenshot everything, my fingers moving automatically while my brain struggled to process what I was seeing. The shower was still running, steam seeping out from under the bathroom door, but I felt cold all over. The most recent messages were from 3 days ago. "Marcus, we can't keep doing this. The wedding is in 2 weeks. Emma, so? Nothing has to change after. Sarah will never suspect. We're too careful. Marcus, this is wrong. She's your sister. Emma, she's my twin. I know her better than anyone. She'll be the perfect wife for you. Stable, predictable, safe. But she'll never make you feel the way I do. Marcus. Emma. Emma, one more time, tonight. After that, we'll be good, I promise. Marcus, where? Emma, the bridal suite at the club. I still have the key from when we did the walkthrough. Meet me at midnight. I'd stared at that last exchange, dated 3 nights ago, and realized that while I'd been home addressing wedding invitations and dreaming about my future, my fiancé and my twin sister had been together in the very room where I was supposed to get ready on my wedding day. The shower had shut off, and I'd quickly deleted the evidence from Marcus's phone, my mind racing with possibilities. I could confront them both. I could call off the wedding. I could pretend I'd never seen anything, and live with the knowledge that my marriage was built on betrayal. Or I could do something else entirely. Marcus had emerged from the bathroom, towel wrapped around his waist, water droplets still clinging to his chest. He'd looked at me with concern, probably noticing my pale complexion. Everything okay, babe? You look like you've seen a ghost. I'd forced a smile, the same smile I'd been perfecting for 26 years whenever Emma had hurt me, and I'd needed to pretend it was fine. Just wedding nerves, I'd said. 2 weeks feels so close and so far away at the same time. He'd crossed to me, wrapping his arms around me and pressing a kiss to the top of my head. His skin had smelled like my shower gel, my shampoo, my soap, but I'd wondered if he'd been thinking about Emma while he'd used them. I love you, Sarah, he'd whispered into my hair. I can't wait to marry you. The words should have made me melt. Instead, they'd felt like lies. That night, I'd started planning. Planning a wedding is stressful under the best circumstances. Planning a wedding while secretly investigating your fiancé's affair with your twin sister is something else entirely. I'd thrown myself into the final details with manic energy, confirming vendors and finalizing seating charts while simultaneously gathering evidence and formulating my strategy. The hardest part was acting normal around Emma and Marcus. We'd continued our regular wedding planning sessions, with Emma enthusiastically offering opinions on everything from napkin colors to processional music. She'd seemed particularly invested in the technical aspects of the ceremony, asking detailed questions about the AV setup, the placement of the screens that would broadcast the ceremony to guests in the overflow area, and the timeline for various announcements. I just want everything to be perfect for you, she'd said during one of our final planning meetings, her hand squeezing mine across the table at our favorite coffee shop. This is your day, Sarah. You deserve for everything to go exactly right. Her words had felt like acid in my veins, but I'd smiled and thanked her for being such an amazing sister. During this time, I'd also been conducting my own investigation. I'd hired a private investigator, a middle-aged woman named Patricia, who specialized in infidelity cases. She'd been initially skeptical when I'd explained the situation. Are you sure you want to know? She'd asked during our first meeting. Sometimes the truth is more painful than suspicion. I need to know, I'd told her. I need to know everything. Patricia had been thorough. Over the course of 10 days, she documented 17 separate meetings between Emma and Marcus. Coffee dates that lasted 3 hours. Long walks in parks across town. 2 hotel visits that I'd been told were work meetings and girls' nights, respectively. The most damning evidence had come from the hotel security footage Patricia had obtained. Clear images of Emma and Marcus entering a room together, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. They'd looked like lovers. They'd looked like they belonged together. Patricia had presented me with a comprehensive file 3 days before the wedding. Photographs, credit card records, phone logs, and a detailed timeline of their affair. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. What are you going to do? She'd asked. I'd stared at the photos spread across her desk. Images of my twin sister and my fiancé living a secret life I'd never suspected. In some of them, they'd been laughing. In others, they'd been kissing. In all of them, they'd looked happy in a way that felt like a punch to my gut. I'm going to get married, I'd said finally. Patricia had frowned. Are you sure that's wise, this level of deception? I'm going to get married, I'd repeated. And then I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly who they're celebrating. The next morning, I'd called Jake Morrison, the AV coordinator for our wedding. Jake was a tech wizard who'd handled events at the country club for years. and he'd been excited about the elaborate setup we'd planned for our ceremony. "Jake, I need a favor," I'd said, "and I need you to keep it between us." "Of course, Sarah, what's up?" "I want to add a special presentation to the reception, a surprise for the guests. Photos and videos from throughout our relationship, maybe some messages from friends who couldn't be there. Can you set that up to play on the main screens during dinner?" "Absolutely. That sounds really sweet. Do you want me to coordinate with Emma to get the materials?" "No," I'd said quickly. "This is a surprise for her too. She's been working so hard on this wedding, and I want to do something special for her as well. I'll put together all the content and send it to you directly." Jake had agreed enthusiastically, and I'd spent the next 2 days carefully curating what would become the most important presentation of my life. The morning of the wedding arrived with chaos. The sabotage I'd discovered in my bridal suite was just the beginning. As Jessica and I tried to figure out how to salvage my dress, my phone had started ringing with calls from various vendors. The photographer couldn't find the location because someone had given him the wrong address. The transportation company claimed they'd received a cancellation call and had assigned our cars to another event. The hair and makeup team had been told the wedding was moved to Sunday and had booked other clients. Each call had felt like another stab, but also like confirmation that I was doing the right thing. Emma hadn't just betrayed me with Marcus, she'd tried to destroy my wedding day entirely. She'd wanted to humiliate me, to ruin the most important day of my life, presumably so she could comfort Marcus in the aftermath and position herself as the better choice. But Emma had made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated how well I knew her. See, Emma had always been a creature of habit. When we were kids and she'd done something wrong, she'd always tried to pin it on me by creating so much chaos and confusion that our parents couldn't figure out what had actually happened. She'd break something, then knock over 3 other things and claim I'd been running around the house. She'd eat the last piece of cake, then leave crumbs on my pillow and chocolate on my fingers while I was sleeping. She'd always been good at creating problems. She'd never been good at hiding her tracks. As Jessica and I worked frantically to solve each wedding crisis, I'd felt oddly calm. Each sabotaged detail had just reinforced my resolve. Emma had declared war on my wedding day. I was going to finish it. "Sarah, I don't understand how all of this could go wrong at once," Jessica had said, her phone pressed to her ear as she tried to reach our backup photographer. "It's like someone actively tried to ruin your wedding." "Yeah," I'd agreed, using a steamer to minimize the turmeric stains on my dress. "It really is." We're deep into this incredible story now, and I hope you're as captivated as I am by these unfolding events. The amount of effort that goes into researching, writing, and narrating these novel-length stories is immense. We're talking about creating content equivalent to a published book, but it's worth it to bring you stories that truly engage and transport you to another world. If you're enjoying this journey so far, please take a second to like this video and share it with friends who appreciate great storytelling. Your support means everything and helps us continue creating these detailed, epic narratives. We still have so much more to discover together, so let's see how this situation unfolds. Despite Emma's best efforts, my wedding was happening. Jessica had performed miracles, calling in favors and managing to secure replacement vendors on 3 hours' notice. The turmeric stains on my dress were still visible up close, but from a distance they looked like part of the design's natural shading. The funeral flowers had been swapped out for simple white roses from the club's own gardens. A string trio from the local music conservatory had agreed to fill in for the canceled quartet. Most importantly, Jake had confirmed that our AV system was working perfectly and that my special presentation was loaded and ready to go. I'd arrived at the ceremony looking like a bride who'd overcome adversity to have her perfect day. The guests had no idea about the morning's chaos, and they'd reacted with appropriate joy and celebration as I'd walked down the aisle. Marcus had looked handsome in his tuxedo, his eyes filled with what appeared to be love and devotion as I'd approached the altar. Emma had been in her place as maid of honor, wearing the dusty rose dress we'd chosen together, her hair swept up in an elegant chignon that matched mine exactly. She'd smiled at me as I'd passed, and I'd smiled back, thinking about how different we'd both look in a few hours. The ceremony itself had been beautiful. We'd exchanged traditional vows, and Marcus had spoken about commitment, honesty, and building a life together based on trust and mutual respect. He'd seemed sincere, his voice slightly choked with emotion as he'd promised to forsake all others, and be faithful to me for the rest of his life. Emma had cried during our vows, pretty, photogenic tears that the photographer had captured beautifully. She'd dabbed at her eyes with the handkerchief our grandmother had given her, the same one she'd carried at every family wedding for the past decade. If I hadn't known better, I might have been moved by her emotional response to my happiness. The reception had started perfectly. 500 guests had filled the country club's grand ballroom, the same room where Emma and I had attended cotillion classes as teenagers, where we'd celebrated our high school graduation party, where we'd danced at our cousin's wedding just a few months earlier. The room looked magical, transformed by thousands of fairy lights and white flowers. Our families were seated at the head table, beaming with pride and joy. Marcus's colleagues from his law firm had traveled from Chicago to celebrate with us. My sorority sisters had coordinated their outfits to complement the wedding colors. Emma's law school friends had surprised me with a beautiful toast during cocktail hour. Everyone was there, everyone was watching. Everyone was ready to celebrate our perfect love story, which made it the perfect audience for the truth. I'd waited through dinner, making small talk and accepting congratulations, my heart hammering against my ribs as I'd watched Jake set up the presentation equipment. Marcus had been charming and attentive, his hand never leaving mine, playing the role of devoted new husband to perfection. Emma had been equally perfect in her role as devoted sister and maid of honor. She'd given a beautiful speech during dinner, talking about how she'd watched Marcus and me fall in love, how she'd never seen me happier, how she knew we were meant to be together. Sarah has always been the better half of our two-person team, she'd said, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. She's kinder than me, more patient, more forgiving. She sees the best in everyone, sometimes even when they don't deserve it. Marcus, you're getting an incredible woman, and I hope you never forget how lucky you are. The guests had applauded enthusiastically. Marcus had squeezed my hand and kissed my cheek. I'd smiled and nodded, thinking about how beautifully Emma had just set up her own downfall. As the dinner plates were being cleared and the dancing portion of the evening was about to begin, I'd stood up and tapped my champagne glass with my fork. "Excuse me, everyone," I'd said, my voice carrying clearly through the room. "Before we start dancing, I have a special presentation I'd like to share. It's a surprise for my new husband and my twin sister, who have both been so important to me throughout this whole process." The room had fallen quiet, 500 faces turning toward me expectantly. Marcus had looked surprised but pleased. Emma had smiled that perfect smile she'd inherited from our mother, the one that had gotten her out of trouble our entire lives. "Jake, could you start the presentation, please?" The lights had dimmed and the large screens positioned around the room had flickered to life. For the first 30 seconds, everything had been exactly what the guests expected. Photos of Marcus and me throughout our relationship, sweet moments captured at family gatherings and romantic dates, images that told the story of our courtship and engagement. The guests had made appreciative sounds, and I'd felt Marcus relax beside me. Emma had been watching the screens with what appeared to be genuine fondness, probably thinking about how thoughtful I was to create such a beautiful tribute to our relationship. Then the first photo of Emma and Marcus appeared. It was one of Patricia's surveillance photos, taken outside a coffee shop downtown. They'd been standing close together, Emma's hand on Marcus's chest, both of them laughing at something. The timestamp showed it was from 2 months ago, on a Tuesday morning when I'd been at work, and Emma had told me she was having lunch with her law school friend Rebecca. The room had gone quiet in a different way. This wasn't the respectful silence of people watching a sweet wedding video. This was the tense silence of people trying to figure out what they were seeing. "This is a photo of my husband and my twin sister," I'd said clearly, my voice carrying through the sound system. "It was taken 8 weeks ago." More photos had appeared on the screens. Emma and Marcus walking hand in hand through Riverside Park. Emma and Marcus entering the Marriott downtown. Emma and Marcus kissing in the parking lot behind the law firm where Emma worked. The silence in the room had become deafening. I'd felt 500 pairs of eyes turning from the screens to me, to Marcus, to Emma, trying to understand what was happening. "These photos were taken by a private investigator over the past 3 weeks," I'd continued, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. They document 17 separate meetings between my husband and my sister during our engagement period. Marcus had gone pale beside me, his champagne glass trembling in his hand. Emma had remained frozen in her chair, that perfect smile still plastered on her face, but her eyes had gone wide with something that might have been panic. The next slide had been a compilation of text messages, enlarged so everyone in the room could read them clearly. Emma's words about how I'd never suspect, Marcus's promises to meet her, their discussions about being careful, about maintaining the secret, about how their affair didn't have to end just because he was marrying me. I also have their text messages, I'd said, including the ones where they planned to continue their relationship after my wedding, where they discussed how I'd be the perfect wife, stable, predictable, safe, while Emma would be the one who made my husband truly happy. The reaction from the crowd had been immediate and visceral. Gasps of shock, murmurs of disbelief, the scraping of chairs as people turned to get better looks at Emma and Marcus. I'd heard my mother's sharp intake of breath, my father's muttered curse, Marcus's mother's cry of denial. But I hadn't been finished. The final slide had been a hotel security video, grainy but clear enough to show Emma and Marcus entering a room together 3 days before our wedding. The timestamp had been visible in the corner. The same night Emma had told me she was having a girls' night with her law school friends. The same night Marcus had said he was working late on a case. This video was taken 3 nights ago, I'd said, while I was at home addressing thank you cards for all the beautiful wedding gifts you've given us. The room had erupted, voices raised in shock and anger. People standing up to get better views. The distinctive sound of chairs being pushed back and high heels clicking on marble floors as guests turned to stare at the head table. Emma had finally moved, standing up abruptly and knocking over her champagne glass in the process. The pale, pink liquid had spread across the white tablecloth like a bloodstain. "Sarah, I can explain," she'd started, but her voice had been lost in the chaos of 500 people talking at once. Marcus had been staring at me with something that might have been admiration mixed with terror. "How long have you known?" he'd asked quietly. 2 weeks, I'd said, meeting his eyes directly. "I've known for 2 weeks, and I let you both think you were getting away with it. I let you think I was stupid enough to believe your lies. I let you plan to humiliate me on my wedding day, and I let you think you'd succeeded." That's when Emma had done something I'd been counting on. She'd tried to make it my fault. "Sarah, you don't understand," she'd said, her voice rising above the din of shocked conversation. "This isn't what it looks like. You're being dramatic and embarrassing everyone. This is your wedding day. Why would you ruin it like this?" Even now, even caught red-handed with photographic evidence, Emma was trying to gaslight me. She was trying to make me feel guilty for exposing her betrayal, trying to make the gathered crowd think I was the one behaving inappropriately. It was exactly what I'd expected her to do, and I'd prepared for it. "You're absolutely right, Emma," I'd said, turning to face her directly. "This is my wedding day. The day you tried to sabotage by soaking my dress in turmeric, changing my flower order to funeral arrangements, and calling my vendors to cancel their services. The day you wanted to humiliate me so badly that you spent weeks planning ways to ruin it." I'd pulled out my phone and opened the screenshots I'd taken of Emma's internet search history, which I'd accessed using the family account we'd shared since college. "Should I show everyone your Google searches from this week?" I'd asked. "Things like how to stain fabric permanently, and, quote, wedding day revenge ideas, and, quote, how to cancel wedding vendors without getting caught." Emma's face had gone white, then red, then white again. The room had fallen silent, except for the sound of someone's phone buzzing, and the distant noise of music from another event, somewhere else in the club. "Or should I show them the screenshots of your text to your friend Monica, where you talked about how satisfying it would be to watch me cry when everything went wrong? Where you said I deserved to be humiliated because I'd stolen Marcus from you?" I turned back to address the crowd, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "My sister didn't just betray me by having an affair with my fiancé," I'd said. "She tried to destroy my wedding day because she couldn't stand the thought of me being happy with the man she wanted for herself. She wanted me to be devastated and desperate so that when she revealed their relationship, I'd be too broken to fight back." The silence in the room had been absolute. 500 people holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. That's when I'd played my final card. "There's one more thing," I'd said, nodding to Jake. The screens had flickered again, and a new video had begun to play. This one wasn't from Patricia's surveillance. It was security footage from the country club itself, taken 2 nights ago, when Emma had used her maid of honor access to sneak into the bridal suite. The video had shown Emma entering the room with a large bag, then spending nearly an hour going through my personal belongings. She'd tried on my dress, posed in front of the mirror, then carefully poured something from a water bottle over the bodice. She'd gone through the boxes of wedding favors and removed half of them. She'd even taken photos of herself in my dress using her phone, making faces and gestures that had clearly been mocking. But the most damning moment had come at the end of the video, when Marcus had appeared in the doorway. Instead of being shocked or angry to find Emma in my bridal suite, ruining my dress, he'd smiled, he'd kissed her, and he'd helped her finish sabotaging my wedding preparations. The two of them had worked together to destroy my wedding day, laughing and kissing between acts of sabotage, planning how they'd comfort me when everything went wrong, discussing their future together once I was too humiliated to fight for the man I'd thought I was marrying. The reaction from the crowd had been immediate and intense. People had started shouting at Emma, at Marcus, at each other. I'd heard my father's voice raised in anger, my mother crying, Marcus's parents demanding explanations. Several guests had started leaving, their chairs scraping against the floor as they'd grabbed their purses and headed for the exits. But most people had stayed, transfixed by the drama unfolding in front of them. Emma had finally cracked under the pressure. "You want to know the truth?" she'd screamed, her carefully constructed facade finally crumbling. "Fine, yes, I've been seeing Marcus. Yes, we sabotaged your precious wedding. And you know what? I'm glad I did it." The room had gone silent again, everyone straining to hear her words. "You've never deserved him, Sarah. You're boring and predictable and safe. And that's not what Marcus needs. He needs someone who challenges him, someone who excites him, someone who makes him feel alive. He needs me." She'd turned to Marcus, her eyes blazing with a mixture of desperation and fury. "Tell them, Marcus. Tell them how you feel about me. Tell them how you've never felt this way about Sarah. How being with her is settling for less than what you really want." But Marcus hadn't said anything. He'd been staring at Emma like he was seeing her clearly for the first time, and he'd apparently not liked what he'd seen. "Emma," he'd said quietly, "stop talking." "No," she'd shouted, "I won't stop talking. I won't pretend anymore. Sarah, you want to humiliate me? Fine. But everyone here should know that your perfect husband chose me. Every time we were together, he told me how much more exciting I was than you, how much more fun, how much more alive he felt with me." She'd turned back to the crowd, her arms spread wide in a gesture of theatrical defiance. "Yes, I sabotaged her wedding. Yes, I've been sleeping with her husband. And yes, I'd do it again, because she doesn't deserve him, and I do." The silence that had followed her confession had been different from the shocked quiet of earlier. This had been the silence of people witnessing someone's complete self-destruction, the kind of silence that falls when someone says something so damaging that there's no possible way to take it back. Emma had seemed to realize what she'd done. Her face had gone pale, and she'd looked around the room at 500 faces staring at her with expressions of disgust, disappointment, and pity. She'd started, then stopped. For the first time in our lives, Emma had been truly speechless. That's when Marcus had finally spoken. "Emma, what you just said isn't true," he'd said, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "I never told you that you were more exciting than Sarah. I never said I felt more alive with you. What I told you was that our affair was a mistake, that I loved Sarah, and that I wanted to end things between us." Quote. He'd turned to face me, his eyes filled with something that might have been regret. "Sarah, I don't expect you to forgive me. What Emma and I did was unforgivable, and I know that. But I need everyone here to know that she's lying about what our relationship meant. I love you. I've always loved you. What happened between Emma and me was weakness and stupidity and selfishness, but it was never love." Emma had made a sound like a wounded animal. "That's not true. Marcus, you can't." "It is true," he'd said firmly. "And Emma, you need to stop. You've done enough damage." That's when I'd realized that my plan had worked even better than I'd hoped. I hadn't just exposed their affair, I'd revealed who they really were. Emma's mask of sisterly devotion had been completely stripped away, showing everyone the selfish, vindictive person she'd become. And Marcus, faced with the consequences of his actions, had been forced to choose between us publicly. He'd chosen me, but it was too late for that to matter. "Thank you for that, Marcus," I'd said, my voice steady despite the chaos around us. "I appreciate you being honest finally, but I need everyone here to understand something." I'd stood up, smoothing down my stained wedding dress, and addressed the crowd of 500 people who'd come to celebrate what they'd thought was the happiest day of my life. I didn't expose this affair because I wanted to fight for my marriage. I exposed it because I wanted all of you to see exactly who my sister and my husband really are. I wanted you to witness their betrayal, their lies, and their complete lack of respect for me or for anyone else in this room. I'd paused, looking around the room at faces I'd known my entire life, family members, friends, colleagues, people who'd watched Emma and me grow up together. "Emma, you've been my twin sister for 26 years. We've shared everything: birthdays, clothes, secrets, friends. I trusted you with my life, and you repaid that trust by trying to steal my husband and destroy my wedding day. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed every single person in this room who loves us both." Emma had started crying, but they weren't the pretty tears she'd shed during the ceremony. These were ugly, desperate sobs that made her mascara run and her face blotchy. "And Marcus," I'd continued, turning to my new husband, "you made vows to me 30 minutes ago. You promised to forsake all others, to be faithful, to honor and cherish me. Everyone in this room heard you make those promises, and now they know exactly how much your word is worth." I'd pulled off my wedding ring, the ring Marcus had placed on my finger less than an hour earlier, and set it on the table in front of me. I don't want a marriage built on lies and betrayal. I don't want a husband who's already proven he can't be trusted. And I don't want a sister who would rather destroy me than see me happy. The room had been completely silent except for Emma's crying and the distant sound of music from another part of the club. "This reception is over," I'd announced. "Thank you all for coming, and I'm sorry you had to witness this. The bar will remain open for another hour if anyone wants to stay and process what just happened. Jake, could you please turn off the screens?" The images had disappeared, leaving just the elegant ballroom filled with 500 shocked guests and the ruins of what was supposed to have been the most beautiful day of my life. We're approaching the climactic moments of this epic tale, and the tension is at its peak. Creating stories of this scope and detail requires not just writing talent, but careful plotting, character development, and attention to every narrative thread. We've journeyed through nearly 40,000 words together, and I hope every moment has kept you engaged. If this story has drawn you in and kept you listening, please show your appreciation by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Share this epic with anyone who loves immersive storytelling, and hit that notification bell for more incredible adventures. Now let's witness how everything comes together in these final, crucial moments. The aftermath of my wedding day revelation was swift and merciless. Within minutes of my announcement, the ballroom had begun to empty. Some guests had left immediately, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama they'd witnessed. Others had lingered, forming small groups to whisper about what they'd seen, shooting glances at Emma and Marcus like they were exhibits in a particularly disturbing museum. My parents had been among the first to approach me. My father had wrapped me in a fierce hug, his voice rough with emotion as he'd whispered, "I'm proud of you, sweetheart." That took more courage than anyone should ever have to show. My mother had been crying, but her tears had been for me, not for Emma. She'd held my face in her hands and looked directly into my eyes as she'd said, "You deserved so much better than this." From both of them. Emma had tried to approach me several times, but each attempt had been blocked by friends or family members who'd positioned themselves between us like bodyguards. I'd watched her growing increasingly desperate, her perfect maid of honor facade completely shattered, mascara streaking down her cheeks as she'd pleaded with anyone who would listen. "You don't understand," she'd said to our cousin Lisa. "Sarah is making this seem worse than it is. It wasn't serious with Marcus. It was just a mistake. She's my twin sister. She can't cut me out of her life over a mistake." But Lisa had turned away from her, and I'd seen in that moment how completely Emma had misunderstood the situation. She'd thought people would forgive her because we were twins, because family was supposed to forgive family. She'd thought her betrayal would be overlooked because it was easier to maintain family harmony than to deal with the consequences of her actions. She'd been wrong. Marcus had tried a different approach. After most of the guests had left, he'd cornered me near the coat check, his face earnest and desperate. "Sarah, please, can we talk privately?" 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. I'd looked at him. This man I'd thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, who'd promised to love and honor me just hours earlier, and felt nothing but exhaustion. "What could you possibly say to me that would matter now?" I'd asked. "I can explain how it started. I can tell you why it happened." "Marcus," I'd interrupted, "I don't care how it started. I don't care why it happened. I don't care if you're sorry, or if Emma seduced you, or if it was all a big misunderstanding. What I care about is that you both lied to me for months, planned to continue lying to me after our wedding, and then tried to sabotage my wedding day when you realized I might find out." He'd flinched as if I'd slapped him. "The sabotage was all Emma. I didn't know she was going to do any of that until you helped her do it," I'd said. "I have security footage of you in my bridal suite, Marcus. You weren't an innocent bystander. You were an active participant." He'd fallen silent, and I'd seen the exact moment he'd realized there was no explanation that would make this better, no apology that would undo what he'd done. "I love you," he'd said, finally, the words sounding hollow and desperate. "I know I've ruined everything, but I need you to know that I love you." "No," I'd said. "You don't love me. You love the idea of me. You love having a wife who's stable and predictable and safe. Someone who'll take care of you and make your life comfortable while you have exciting affairs with more interesting women. That's not love, Marcus. That's convenience." I'd walked away from him then, leaving him standing alone by the coat check in his wedding tuxedo, and I'd felt something I hadn't expected: relief. The next few hours had been a blur of logistics and emotional conversations. Jessica had helped me change out of my wedding dress and into the casual clothes I'd packed for after the reception. Jake had given me copies of all the evidence I'd shown, along with the original security footage from the bridal suite. The country club manager had handled the details of closing down the reception and ensuring that any remaining guests were taken care of. By midnight, the ballroom was empty, except for the cleaning crew and the remnants of what was supposed to have been my perfect wedding reception. I'd gone home to the apartment Marcus and I had shared for 2 years, but only to pack. I'd thrown clothes and personal belongings into suitcases, moving efficiently through rooms that no longer felt like home. Everything reminded me of him, of us, of the life I'd thought we were building together. Marcus had come home around 2 a.m., finding me in the living room with my packed bags. "Where will you go?" he'd asked. "That's not your concern anymore," I'd said. "Sarah, please, we need to talk about this. We need to figure out what comes next." "What comes next is divorce," I'd said. "My lawyer will be in touch." He'd tried to argue, to negotiate, to convince me to go to counseling, or take time to think about it. But I'd been done thinking. I'd done all my thinking over the past 2 weeks while I'd planned my revenge. Now I was ready to move forward. I'd spent that first night at Jessica's apartment, lying awake on her couch and replaying the events of the day. Part of me had felt vindicated. I'd exposed their betrayal, shown everyone exactly who they were, and maintained my dignity throughout the entire ordeal. But another part of me had felt hollow, like I'd won a battle but lost something essential in the process. The next morning had brought a flood of messages from friends and family. Most had been supportive, expressing shock at Emma's and Marcus's behavior and admiration for how I'd handled the situation. But a few had been critical, suggesting that I'd gone too far, that I'd humiliated Emma and Marcus unnecessarily, that I should have handled things privately. The most painful message had come from my Aunt Carol, Emma's godmother. "Sarah, I understand you're hurt, but what you did yesterday was cruel. Emma made a mistake, but she's still your sister. Family should forgive family. This public humiliation will follow her for the rest of her life. Is your need for revenge really worth destroying your twin sister's reputation and future?" I'd stared at that message for a long time, wondering if she was right. Had I gone too far? Had my need for justice crossed the line into cruelty? But then I'd remembered Emma's words from the reception. Yes, I sabotaged her wedding. Yes, I've been sleeping with her husband. And yes, I'd do it again, because she doesn't deserve him and I do. She'd shown no remorse, no regret, no understanding of how deeply she'd hurt me. Even when caught red-handed, she'd been defiant and selfish, more concerned with claiming Marcus than with the damage she'd done to our relationship. No, I decided. I hadn't gone too far. I'd simply ensured that the truth was known. 6 months later, I was living in a small but beautiful apartment across town, working as a freelance event planner, and discovering who I was when I wasn't part of a twin set or half of a couple. The divorce had been finalized quickly, Marcus hadn't contested anything, and I'd gotten a generous settlement that had allowed me to start my own business. He'd moved to Chicago as originally planned, taking the job that was supposed to have been the start of our new life together. Emma had faced more serious consequences. The law firm where she'd worked had asked her to resign after the wedding video had gone viral. Yes, viral. Someone had recorded my presentation on their phone and posted it to social media, where it had been viewed millions of times under hashtags like #weddingrevenge and #twinbetrayal. She'd been forced to move back in with our parents, unable to afford her apartment after losing her job. Our mother had told me that Emma spent most of her time in her childhood bedroom, refusing to see friends or family, claiming that I'd ruined her life. She wants to apologize to you, our mother had said during one of our weekly phone calls. She knows she made a terrible mistake and she wants to make things right. It's too late for apologies, I'd said. She had months to come clean, months to stop the affair, months to treat me with even basic respect. Instead, she chose to escalate by sabotaging my wedding. That wasn't a mistake, Mom. That was a deliberate choice to hurt me as badly as possible. She's your twin sister, Sarah. You've never been apart before. And whose fault is that? I'd asked. I didn't choose this separation, Emma did, when she decided that having Marcus was more important than having me. The hardest part hadn't been losing Marcus. I'd realized fairly quickly that he'd never been the man I'd thought he was. The hardest part had been losing Emma, the person who'd been my other half for 26 years. But gradually I'd begun to understand that the Emma I'd lost might never have existed in the first place. The selfless, loyal sister I'd thought I knew had been a facade, and underneath had been someone capable of betraying me in the most fundamental way possible. I had started therapy to help process the complex grief of losing a twin sister who is still alive but no longer part of my life. Dr. Martinez had helped me understand that my decision to expose the affair publicly hadn't been about revenge. It had been about refusing to let Emma and Marcus control the narrative of my humiliation. You took back your power, she'd explained during one of our sessions. They expected you to be the victim, to be devastated and broken while they moved forward with their relationship. Instead, you forced them to face the consequences of their choices in front of everyone who mattered to you both. Sometimes I wonder if I was too harsh, I'd admitted. Would you have felt better if you'd handled it privately? If you'd confronted them quietly, and then watched them continue their relationship, while people whispered about poor Sarah who couldn't keep her husband? When she'd put it that way, I'd known the answer was no. The event planning business had taken off more quickly than I'd expected. Word had spread about the woman who'd planned the most dramatic wedding reveal in recent memory. And I'd found myself booked solid with clients who wanted someone who could handle high-pressure situations and pay attention to every detail. Ironically, my skills at orchestrating the exposure of Emma and Marcus had made me an excellent wedding planner. I could anticipate problems, manage logistics, and ensure that every element of an event came together perfectly. The difference was that now I was using those skills to create joy rather than reveal betrayal. On the 1-year anniversary of my wedding day, I'd received an unexpected visitor. Emma had shown up at my apartment building, looking thin and tired, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail instead of the perfectly styled look she'd always favored. She'd been wearing jeans and a wrinkled t-shirt, so different from the polished professional wardrobe she'd cultivated as a lawyer. I know you don't want to see me, she'd said when I'd answered the door, but I needed to try one more time. I'd looked at her, this person who'd shared my face and my childhood, but who'd become a stranger, and felt a complicated mix of emotions: sadness, anger, grief, and something that might have been pity. What do you want, Emma? I want to apologize. Really apologize. Not the fake stuff I tried before. I want to tell you that I know what I did was unforgivable. That I know I destroyed our relationship and hurt you in ways that can never be fixed. She'd started crying then, the same ugly tears she'd shed at the wedding reception. I want to tell you that losing you has been the worst consequence of my actions. Worse than losing my job, worse than having to move back home, worse than everyone knowing what I did. I lost my twin sister, and I know it's my fault. I'd listened to her words, waiting to feel something, forgiveness, anger, sadness, but mostly I'd felt empty. Emma, I'd said finally, I appreciate that you're sorry. I believe that you understand what you lost. But sorry doesn't undo the months of lying, the affair, the sabotage, or the humiliation you put me through. Sorry doesn't give me back the sister I thought I had. I know, she'd whispered. I know I can't fix this. But I had to try. I had to tell you that I love you and that I'm sorry and that I'd do anything to take it back. If you really loved me, I'd said, you wouldn't have done it in the first place. She'd nodded, tears streaming down her face. You're right. You're absolutely right. We'd stood there in my doorway for a long moment, two women who'd once shared everything now separated by choices that couldn't be undone. I hope you find a way to be happy, I'd said finally. I hope you figure out who you are when you're not competing with me or trying to take what's mine. But I can't be part of that process. Emma had nodded again and turned to leave. I'd watched her walk away, this person who'd looked exactly like me but who I no longer recognized, and I'd felt the final piece of my grief settle into place. 2 years later, I was planning my second wedding, this time, my own. David was nothing like Marcus. Where Marcus had been charming and smooth, David was genuine and straightforward. Where Marcus had made grand romantic gestures, David showed his love through small, consistent acts of kindness. Where Marcus had made me feel like I was competing for his attention, David made me feel like I was his priority. We'd met when he'd hired me to plan his sister's wedding, and he'd won me over by helping me set up chairs when one of my vendors had been late, staying until midnight to ensure everything was perfect for his sister's big day. You don't have to do this, I'd told him as we'd arranged centerpieces at 11 p.m. This isn't your job. Neither is making my sister's wedding perfect, he'd said with a smile, but sometimes we do things because we care about people. He'd proposed 6 months later, not with a grand gesture in front of family, but on a quiet Tuesday evening in my apartment kitchen while I'd been making dinner. I don't want to wait, he'd said, getting down on one knee between the stove and the refrigerator. I don't need a perfect moment or a big audience. I just need you to know that I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy. This time, I was planning a small ceremony, 50 guests instead of 500. Jessica as my maid of honor, with no twin sister standing beside me. A simple celebration focused on love and commitment rather than spectacle and performance. 3 weeks before the wedding, I'd received a card in the mail. No return address, but I'd recognized Emma's handwriting immediately. Sarah, I heard about your engagement through Mom. I wanted you to know that I'm happy for you. David seems like a good man, and you deserve all the happiness in the world. I've been seeing a therapist for the past year, working on understanding why I made the choices I did and how to be a better person going forward. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness or to try to repair our relationship. I know that ship has sailed, and I accept that. I just wanted you to know that I think about you every day, that I'm proud of the business you've built and the life you've created, and that I hope your second wedding is everything your first wedding should have been. I love you, twin. Emma. I'd stared at that card for a long time, then put it in the drawer with all the other mementos from our shared childhood, things I couldn't throw away but couldn't quite hold on to either. My wedding to David was everything my first wedding should have been. Small and intimate, focused on the people who truly mattered to us, filled with genuine joy and celebration. No drama, no surprises, no betrayals. Just two people making a commitment to build a life together based on honesty, trust, and mutual respect. As David and I had exchanged vows, I'd thought about how different this felt from standing at the altar with Marcus. There was no anxiety, no nagging doubt, no feeling that I was settling for less than I deserved. There was just love, pure and simple and real. During our first dance, David had whispered in my ear, "No regrets?" I'd looked around the room at our friends and family, at the life I'd built from the ashes of my first marriage, at the man who'd chosen me not because I was safe or convenient, but because he genuinely loved who I was. "None," I'd whispered back. "Not a single one." But the story doesn't end there. The weeks and months following my wedding day revelation were filled with discoveries, confrontations, and revelations that painted an even darker picture of the betrayal I'd uncovered. 3 days after the wedding, Patricia called me with information I hadn't expected. "Sarah, I kept digging after our last meeting," she said, her voice careful and professional. "There are some things you need to know about Emma and Marcus's relationship. Things that go back further than we originally thought." I'd been staying at Jessica's apartment, surrounded by wedding gifts I had no idea what to do with, trying to figure out how to untangle a life I'd thought was settled. Patricia's call had been both unwelcome and necessary. "How much further back?" I'd asked, though part of me already knew I wouldn't like the answer. "Remember when you said their affair started about 6 months ago? I found evidence going back almost 2 years. Hotel receipts, restaurant charges, even a weekend trip to Napa Valley that coincided with when you thought Marcus was at a legal conference and Emma was visiting her law school friend in San Francisco." The room had started spinning. 2 years. They'd been betraying me for 2 years, not 6 months. That meant their affair had started just 4 months after Marcus and I had gotten engaged. "There's more," Patricia had continued. "I found correspondence between them that suggests Emma actively pursued Marcus from the beginning. She initiated contact, arranged the first meeting, and orchestrated many of their encounters. This wasn't a gradual thing that developed over time. It was a calculated seduction." She'd sent me a file of evidence that night: emails, credit card records, phone logs, and screenshots of social media messages that painted a picture of systematic deception. Emma hadn't just stolen my fiancé. She'd been planning it from the moment I'd announced my engagement. One email in particular had made my blood run cold. From Emma Patterson to Marcus Williams, subject, "Congratulations date, 4 days after my engagement. Marcus, I wanted to congratulate you on your engagement to Sarah. She's so lucky to have found someone like you, someone who truly understands what he wants in life. I have to confess, I've always wondered what might have happened if we'd met first. Not that I would ever want to interfere with Sarah's happiness, of course. She deserves the world. But if you ever want to talk to someone who really gets you, who understands the complexities of what you're feeling, I'm here. We're going to be family soon, after all. XO Emma." The manipulation had been there from the very beginning, disguised as sisterly support and family bonding. Emma had positioned herself as Marcus's confidant and understanding friend, creating intimacy through shared concerns about whether he was ready for marriage, whether I was the right person for him, whether he might be settling down too young. I'd spent hours reading through their correspondence, watching Emma systematically undermine my relationship while maintaining the perfect facade of supportive sister. She'd questioned my decisions, highlighted my flaws, and presented herself as a more suitable alternative at every turn. "Sarah's been so stressed about the wedding planning. I worry she's becoming a bit controlling. You know how she gets when she's anxious." Quote, "I don't think Sarah really understands your career ambitions. She's always been more focused on settling down than on personal growth. You and I have such similar perspectives on life. Sometimes I wonder if Sarah fully appreciates your intellectual curiosity." Each message had been a small betrayal, but together they formed a comprehensive campaign to steal my fiancé and destroy my self-confidence. The real confrontation with my family had come a week after the wedding, when everyone had finally processed what had happened and was ready to address the elephant in the room. My parents had asked both Emma and me to come to Sunday dinner, just like we had every week for our entire lives. But this Sunday was different. This Sunday was about choosing sides. I'd arrived first, finding my parents in the kitchen where they'd spent countless hours mediating fights between Emma and me over the years. But this wasn't a typical twin squabble that could be resolved with forced apologies and shared dessert. "How are you holding up, sweetheart?" my mother had asked, wrapping me in the kind of hug that only mothers can give. Warm, protective, and unconditionally loving. "I'm surviving," I'd said honestly. "It's harder than I expected, losing both of them at the same time." My father had been less emotionally tactful but more direct. What Emma did was unforgivable. he'd said bluntly. And what that boy Marcus did was even worse. You handled it better than either of them deserved. When Emma had arrived 20 minutes later, the temperature in the room had dropped noticeably. She'd looked terrible, thin, pale, with dark circles under her eyes and her hair pulled back in a messy bun. This wasn't the polished, confident Emma I'd known my entire life. This was someone who'd been forced to confront the consequences of her actions. "Hi," she'd said quietly, not meeting anyone's eyes. The four of us had sat around the same dining room table where we'd shared thousands of meals, but everything felt different. Emma and I had sat across from each other instead of side by side. Our parents had flanked us like referees, preparing for a fight. "Emma, your mother and I have been talking," my father had begun, his voice stern in a way I hadn't heard since we were teenagers. "We need to understand what happened here. We need to understand how you could betray your sister like this." Quote, Emma had started crying immediately, but they weren't the manipulative tears she'd used to get out of trouble when we were kids. These were tears of genuine shame and regret. "I don't know," she'd whispered. "I don't know how it started, or why I let it continue, or why I thought sabotaging Sarah's wedding was a good idea. I was jealous, and I was angry, and I made terrible decisions." "Jealous of what?" I'd asked, speaking directly to her for the first time since the wedding. "What did I have that you wanted so badly you were willing to destroy our relationship to get it?" Emma had looked up at me then, her eyes red and swollen. "Everything," she'd said. "You had everything I wanted. Marcus loved you in a way that David never loved me. You had this perfect relationship and this perfect wedding planned and this perfect life mapped out, and I had nothing. So you decided to take it." "I didn't plan it," she'd protested. "It just happened. Marcus and I started talking, and he was having doubts about the engagement, and I was there to listen. And then one thing led to another, and before I knew it, we were—" "Don't," I'd interrupted. "Don't make this sound like some romantic accident. I read your emails, Emma. I saw how you manipulated him from the beginning. You planned this." The silence that had followed was deafening. Emma had stared at me in shock, clearly not realizing I'd seen the evidence of her calculated seduction. "You read our emails?" she'd asked. I read everything. The emails, the text messages, the hotel receipts. "I know this affair went back 2 years, not 6 months. I know you started pursuing Marcus 4 days after I got engaged. I know you systematically undermined my relationship while pretending to be supportive." Emma had gone completely white. "Sarah, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I'd said. "You decided you wanted my life, so you set out to steal it. And when you realized I was about to find out, you tried to destroy my wedding day so thoroughly that I'd be too humiliated to fight back." My parents had been listening to this exchange with growing horror. My mother had been crying silently, while my father had been clenching his fists on the table. "Emma Catherine Patterson," my mother had said, her voice shaking with emotion, "I am ashamed of you. I'm ashamed of what you did to your sister, and I'm ashamed of the person you've apparently become." Quote. Emma had dissolved into sobs at that point, but I'd felt no sympathy for her. She'd cried plenty of times over the years to get out of trouble, and it had always worked, but this time was different. "I think Emma should move out," I'd said quietly. "I think she should find her own apartment and figure out who she is when she's not competing with me or trying to take what's mine." "Sarah, please," Emma had begged. "I have nowhere else to go. I lost my job. I can't afford my own place." "You should have thought about that before you decided to have a 2-year affair with my fiancé," I'd said coldly. My parents had exchanged glances, the kind of wordless communication that comes from 30 years of marriage. Finally, my father had spoken. "Emma, your sister is right. You need to leave. Not permanently, but until you can figure out how to be a better person. Until you can prove that you understand the gravity of what you've done." "Where am I supposed to go?" Emma had asked desperately. "Your Aunt Carol offered to let you stay with her in Portland," my mother had said. "She thinks a change of scenery might help you get some perspective." And so Emma had been essentially exiled from our family, sent across the country to live with our aunt, and work through her issues away from the wreckage she'd created. What I hadn't expected was how quickly the story would spread beyond our immediate circle. Someone at the wedding, I never found out who, had recorded portions of my presentation on their phone. By Tuesday morning, a video titled "Bride Exposes Twin Sister's Affair at Wedding Reception" had been posted to TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. By Wednesday, it had been viewed over 1 million times. By Friday, I was getting interview requests from local news stations, daytime television shows, and online publications. The story had captured public imagination in a way I'd never anticipated. The video that went viral wasn't the full presentation. It was a carefully edited compilation that showed the most dramatic moments: Emma and Marcus's shocked faces, Emma's public confession, Marcus's weak attempts at explanation, and my final speech to the crowd. The editing made the whole thing look like a perfectly orchestrated reality TV moment. The comments were intense, thousands of people weighing in on my decision to expose the affair publicly, debating whether I'd been justified or cruel, sharing their own stories of betrayal and revenge. Most were supportive. "This woman is a queen. Her sister and husband tried to humiliate her, and she turned it around on them. Iconic." The level of planning and restraint this took. She knew for 2 weeks and still went through with the wedding just to expose them. Legendary. As a twin myself, I cannot imagine betraying my sister like this. Emma got exactly what she deserved. But some were critical. "This is cruel and vindictive. She could have handled this privately instead of destroying 2 people's lives for social media content. The sister made a mistake, but this level of public humiliation will follow her forever. Some things should stay in the family. Both the sister and husband are wrong, but this woman clearly planned this whole thing for maximum drama. She's not innocent here." Reading the comments had been overwhelming and addictive. Thousands of strangers debating the most painful moment of my life, analyzing my decisions, speculating about my motivations. Some had tried to find my social media accounts, my workplace, even my new address. Jessica had finally made me delete all the social media apps from my phone. "You're becoming obsessed with what random people think about you," she'd said during one of our many conversations about the aftermath, "and that's not healthy." She'd been right, of course, but it had been hard to resist the validation from strangers who understood what I'd been through, who supported my decision to fight back instead of suffering silently. The media attention had been even more surreal. Local news stations had wanted to interview me about standing up to betrayal and taking control of your narrative. A morning show producer had pitched a segment called "Wedding Revenge, Right or Wrong." A relationship expert had written an entire blog post analyzing my psychological motivations. I declined all interviews, but that hadn't stopped people from speculating about my story, my family, and my motivations. The unexpected consequence of going viral had been an influx of business opportunities. Within 2 weeks of the video spreading, I'd received over 50 inquiries from potential clients who wanted me to plan their events. Some were drawn to my organizational skills and attention to detail. Others seemed to think I was some kind of revenge expert who could help them orchestrate their own dramatic confrontations. I'd been careful to accept only legitimate event planning opportunities, but the business had grown faster than I'd ever imagined possible. Word of mouth had spread through social circles, and soon I was planning corporate events, birthday parties, anniversary celebrations, and yes, weddings. The irony of becoming a successful wedding planner after my own wedding disaster wasn't lost on me. But I discovered that I had a talent for managing complex events, anticipating problems, and ensuring that everything went according to plan. My experience with Marcus and Emma had taught me to pay attention to details others might miss, to trust my instincts about people, and to always have a backup plan. My first major client had been Rebecca Morrison, whose daughter was getting married at the same country club where my wedding had taken place. Rebecca had been at my wedding reception and had witnessed the entire drama firsthand. "I know it sounds strange," she'd said during our initial consultation, "but watching how you handled that situation convinced me that you're exactly the kind of person I want planning my daughter's wedding. You stayed calm under pressure, you paid attention to every detail, and you made sure everyone knew exactly what was happening. Mrs. Morrison, I appreciate the confidence, but I should mention that I don't have formal training in event planning. I'm not sure I'm qualified to." "Honey," she'd interrupted, "after what I saw you pull off at your own wedding, I'm pretty sure you can handle anything my daughter throws at you. The Morrison wedding had been my first major success. Everything had gone perfectly. The flowers were exactly as ordered. The vendors showed up on time. The timeline ran smoothly, and the bride and groom had been radiantly happy. Word had spread from there, and within 6 months, I'd been booked solid through the following year. While Emma had been exiled to Portland, Marcus had faced different but equally serious consequences. His law firm had been less understanding about the situation than I might have expected. The managing partner, James Crawford, had been at our wedding and had witnessed the entire presentation. Apparently, having a senior associate's personal drama go viral wasn't the kind of publicity the firm wanted to be associated with. Marcus had been passed over for the partnership track he'd been on and had been asked to consider, quote, exploring opportunities elsewhere. In legal terms, that meant he'd been politely fired. He'd taken the job in Chicago earlier than planned, but under very different circumstances. Instead of moving there as a newly married man with a bright future, he'd been essentially fleeing the consequences of his actions. I'd heard through mutual friends that he'd struggled in Chicago. The legal community was smaller than people realized, and word of his affair and the viral wedding video had followed him. He'd had difficulty finding a position at a prestigious firm and had eventually taken a job at a much smaller practice for significantly less money than he'd been expecting. The most satisfying piece of information had come from Jessica, who'd run into Marcus's former roommate at a coffee shop. He asked about you, she'd told me over dinner one evening. Marcus did. Apparently, he's been having a hard time dating because women keep recognizing him from the video. His roommate said he's been to therapy and is trying to, quote, on himself, but that he's basically become a social pariah. I'd felt a complicated mix of emotions hearing that. Part of me had been glad that Marcus was facing real consequences for his actions. But another part of me had felt something that might have been pity. He'd made terrible choices, but he was still someone I'd once loved. Do you feel bad for him? Jessica had asked, reading my expression. A little, I'd admitted, but not enough to regret what I did. He made his choices, and now he's living with them. Just like I'm living with mine. Any regrets about Emma? That question had been harder to answer. Emma was my twin sister, my other half, for 26 years. Even after everything she'd done, cutting her out of my life completely had felt like amputating a limb. I miss who I thought she was, I'd said finally. I miss the sister I believed I had. But I don't miss the person she actually turned out to be. Emma's time in Portland had been intended as a temporary solution, a chance for her to get perspective and figure out how to rebuild her life. But temporarily stretched into 8 months, then 12, then 18. According to my Aunt Carol, Emma had struggled significantly with the transition. She'd fallen into a depression that had required professional help, had difficulty finding work due to her tarnished reputation, and had seemed unable to move forward with any aspect of her life. She spends most of her time in her room, Aunt Carol had told my mother during one of their weekly phone calls, conversations I'd heard secondhand. She's lost weight, she doesn't socialize, and she seems stuck in this cycle of regret and self-pity. I'm worried about her. Part of me had wanted to feel sorry for Emma, but I'd hardened my heart against that impulse. She'd had months to come clean about the affair, months to end things with Marcus, months to treat me with basic decency. Instead, she'd escalated her betrayal by sabotaging my wedding day. The consequences she was facing were the direct result of choices she'd made. Still, when my mother had asked if I'd consider talking to Emma, not forgiving her, just talking, I'd found myself conflicted. She's your twin sister, my mother had said during one of our weekly coffee dates. I'm not asking you to forget what she did or to let her back into your life. But she's struggling, Sarah. She's really struggling. Good, I'd said, and I'd meant it. She should be struggling. She should be facing consequences. That's what happens when you systematically betray someone who loves you. I understand that you're angry. I'm not angry anymore, Mom, I'd interrupted. I was angry for the first few months, but now I'm just done. Emma isn't my problem anymore. She made choices, and now she gets to live with them. My mother had looked sad, but had nodded in understanding. I think she'd recognized that this wasn't teenage drama that could be resolved with forced apologies and family mediation. This was a fundamental break that couldn't be repaired with good intentions and time. The story of how I'd met David had been much simpler and more organic than my relationship with Marcus. His sister Katie had hired me to plan her wedding about 8 months after my viral moment had died down. She'd wanted a small, intimate ceremony at a vineyard in Sonoma County, and she'd specifically sought me out because she'd heard I was good at managing complex logistics while keeping events feeling personal and meaningful. During our first planning meeting, Katie had mentioned that her brother would be heavily involved in the wedding planning process. "David's really protective of me," she'd explained. "Our parents died when I was in college, and he basically raised me after that. He's going to want to be part of every decision. And he's going to have opinions about everything. I hope that's okay." Quote, I'd assured her that family involvement was normal and that I was used to managing multiple personalities and opinions during the planning process. When David had walked into our second meeting, my first thought had been that he looked nothing like Marcus. Where Marcus had been tall and conventionally handsome, David was shorter and more solid, with kind eyes and laugh lines around them. Where Marcus had dressed in expensive suits and carried himself with calculated confidence, David wore jeans and a button-down shirt and seemed genuinely relaxed. "You must be Sarah," he'd said, extending his hand with a warm smile. "Katie's told me amazing things about your work. Thank you for taking on her wedding." There had been no game playing, no attempt to impress me, no smooth lines or calculated charm. Just a straightforward introduction from someone who clearly adored his sister and wanted her to have a perfect wedding day. Over the course of planning Katie's wedding, David had been consistently helpful, thoughtful, and genuine. When vendors had been late, he'd pitched in without being asked. When Katie had been stressed about decisions, he'd offered practical suggestions and emotional support. When I'd been working 16-hour days in the final week before the wedding, he'd shown up with coffee and food and had stayed to help with setup. The attraction had developed slowly, built on respect and friendship rather than immediate chemistry. David had made me laugh during stressful moments, had listened to my ideas without trying to improve them, and had treated me like a valued professional rather than just another vendor. The night of Katie's wedding, after everything had gone perfectly and the last guests had gone home, David and I had been cleaning up the reception space together. "You know," he'd said as we'd stacked chairs and collected centerpieces, "I've watched you work for 3 months, and I'm pretty sure you're some kind of magician." "How so?" I'd asked, laughing. "You made my sister's impossible dreams come to life while managing her anxiety, her fiancé's large family, my overprotective tendencies, and about 15 different vendors. And you made it all look effortless." "It's not magic," I'd said. "It's just paying attention to details and caring about people." "That's rarer than you think," he'd said seriously. "Most people are too focused on themselves to really pay attention to what others need." Quote, that conversation had marked the beginning of something different for me. David hadn't been trying to impress me or win me over. He'd simply been observing me, appreciating my work, and treating me with genuine respect. Our first official date hadn't happened until 2 months later, when he'd asked if I wanted to get dinner and see a movie. Nothing fancy, nothing designed to overwhelm or impress. Just 2 people getting to know each other outside of a professional context. "I should probably mention," he'd said over appetizers, "that I know about your first wedding. Not the details, but I know it ended dramatically and went viral. Katie told me because she thought I should know before asking you out." I'd tensed, waiting for questions about Emma and Marcus, waiting for him to treat me like a curiosity or a cautionary tale. Instead, he'd said, "I'm sorry you went through that. It must have been incredibly painful. But for what it's worth, I think you handled an impossible situation with more grace than most people could have managed." That had been it. No probing questions, no requests for juicy details, no attempt to psychoanalyze my decisions. Just acknowledgement that I'd been hurt and respect for how I'd handled it. David and I had dated for a 1.5 years before he'd proposed, taking time to build a relationship based on trust, communication, and genuine compatibility. There had been no rushing toward milestones, no pressure to move faster than felt comfortable, no sense that either of us was settling for less than we deserved. The proposal itself had been perfectly suited to who we were as a couple. No grand gestures, no public displays, no pressure for me to say yes in front of an audience. Just the 2 of us in my apartment kitchen on a random Tuesday evening. talking about our future while I'd made dinner. "I've been thinking," he'd said, leaning against the counter and watching me chop vegetables for stir-fry. "About what?" "About us. About how happy I am with you. About how much I love the life we're building together." I'd looked up from the cutting board, something in his tone making me pay closer attention. "Sarah," he'd continued, "I don't need a perfect moment or a dramatic setting or a ring that costs 3 months' salary. I just need you to know that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to marry you." Quote. He'd pulled a simple ring box from his pocket. Not hidden, not part of an elaborate surprise, just a straightforward offer. "I know marriage might be complicated for you after what happened with Marcus," he'd said, "and I know the idea of another wedding might bring up difficult memories. We can do whatever feels right for you. Big ceremony, small ceremony, courthouse, destination, whatever you want. The only thing that matters to me is that we're making a commitment to each other." I'd stared at him, this man who'd spent a year and a half proving that he was nothing like Marcus, nothing like the person who'd betrayed me so completely. "Are you sure?" I'd asked. "I come with a lot of baggage. A viral video, a complicated relationship with my family, trust issues." "Sarah," he'd interrupted gently, "everyone comes with baggage. The question is whether the person is worth dealing with the baggage, and you're worth everything." I'd said yes, of course. But more than that, I'd felt a sense of peace that had been missing from my engagement to Marcus. This time, there were no doubts, no nagging feelings that something was wrong, no sense that I was settling or being settled for. This time, I was choosing someone who chose me back, completely and without reservation. Planning my second wedding had been an entirely different experience from the first. With Marcus, every decision had felt weighted with significance. Every detail a reflection of our love story, every choice a statement about our future together. I'd wanted perfection because I'd thought our relationship was perfect. With David, the planning had been about celebration rather than performance. We'd chosen a small venue because we wanted intimate conversation with our guests, not because we were making a statement about our values. We'd selected a simple menu because we wanted good food, not because we were trying to impress anyone. We'd invited 50 people because those were the 50 people who mattered most to us, not because we were obligated to include everyone we'd ever known. The most significant difference had been the absence of drama. No sabotage, no last-minute crises, no sense that anyone was working against us or trying to undermine our happiness. Just 2 people planning a celebration of their love, with the support of people who genuinely cared about them. Jessica had been my maid of honor again. But this time she'd been relaxed and happy instead of frantically managing wedding disasters. David's best friend Mike had been his best man, and the wedding party had been small and genuinely excited to be there. The ceremony itself had been everything my first wedding should have been. Meaningful vows that we'd written ourselves, focused on the specific things we loved about each other rather than generic promises. Guests who were present and engaged rather than scrolling through their phones or gossiping about family drama. A celebration that felt joyful and authentic rather than performative. During our first dance, David had whispered in my ear, "No regrets?" I'd looked around the room at our friends and family, at the life I'd built from the ashes of my first marriage, at the man who'd chosen me not because I was safe or convenient, but because he genuinely loved who I was. "None," I'd whispered back. "Not a single one." 3 years after my viral wedding moment, my event planning business had become one of the most successful in the region. What had started as a way to stay busy and support myself financially had evolved into something I genuinely loved. I'd discovered that I had a talent for understanding what people really wanted from their celebrations, for managing complex logistics without losing sight of the emotional significance of events, and for creating experiences that felt both polished and personal. The business had grown from just me working out of my apartment to a team of 5 employees operating out of a beautiful office space downtown. We'd planned everything from intimate dinner parties to corporate galas to elaborate destination weddings, and we'd built a reputation for reliability, creativity, and flawless execution. The most rewarding part had been helping other couples avoid the pitfalls I'd experienced. I'd become skilled at reading relationship dynamics, at identifying potential problems before they became crises, and at helping couples navigate family drama and personal conflicts during the stressful wedding planning process. More than once, I'd gently suggested that a couple might want to postpone their wedding until they'd worked through some underlying issues. I'd learned to recognize the signs of relationships that weren't ready for marriage, and I'd developed a confidence to have difficult conversations when necessary. "You saved our marriage before it even started," one bride had told me, after I'd helped her and her fiancé work through a major disagreement about family involvement in their wedding. "If we hadn't learned to communicate about this stuff now, we would have been divorced within 2 years." That kind of feedback had made all the challenges of building a business worthwhile. 2.5 years after Emma had left for Portland, she'd finally returned home. I'd heard about it through my mother, who'd been both excited and nervous about having both her daughters in the same city again. "She's different," my mother had told me during one of our coffee dates. "She's been in therapy, she's found a job at a small nonprofit, and she seems to have gained some perspective on what happened." Good for her, I'd said, and I'd meant it. I'd wanted Emma to get better, to learn from her mistakes, and to build a healthier life for herself. But I'd also been clear that her personal growth didn't obligate me to welcome her back into my life. "She'd like to see you," my mother had continued carefully. "Not to ask for forgiveness or to try to repair your relationship. She just wants to apologize properly, and to let you know that she understands why you can't forgive her." I'd considered this request for several weeks. Part of me had been curious about what Emma had learned during her time away. Whether she'd gained genuine insight into her behavior, or whether she was just going through the motions of recovery. Another part of me had been worried that seeing her would reopen wounds that had finally started to heal. In the end, I'd agreed to meet her for coffee, neutral territory, time-limited, with no expectations for ongoing contact. Emma had been waiting for me at a small cafe downtown, looking nervous and older than her 28 years. She'd dressed simply, without the careful styling that had always been part of her image, and she'd seemed genuinely anxious rather than performing anxiety for effect. "Thank you for coming," she'd said as I'd sat down across from her. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," I'd admitted. "I'm not sure what this accomplishes." "It doesn't accomplish anything for you," she'd said. "This is for me. I needed to apologize to you properly, in person, without any expectations that you'll forgive me or want me in your life." I'd studied her face, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd become so skilled at recognizing. But she'd seemed genuinely different, more subdued, more thoughtful, less concerned with managing my reaction to her words. "I spent 2 years in therapy trying to understand why I did what I did," she'd continued. "And the conclusion I came to is that I was jealous of you in ways I didn't even recognize. Not just jealous of Marcus, but jealous of your ability to be happy, to be satisfied with your life, to build something stable and good." She'd paused, clearly choosing her words carefully. "I think I sabotaged your wedding because part of me wanted you to be as miserable as I was. I wanted you to understand what it felt like to have everything fall apart, to feel like you weren't good enough, to wonder if you'd ever be truly happy." Her honesty had been unexpected and unsettling. This wasn't the Emma I'd known, who'd always had explanations and justifications for her behavior. This was someone who'd spent time examining her motivations and had come to unflattering conclusions about herself. "The affair with Marcus wasn't about him," she'd continued. "It was about taking something that was yours. It was about proving that I could, that I was more desirable or more exciting or more worthy of love. It was competitive and petty and cruel, and I'm ashamed of who I became." I'd listened to her words, waiting to feel something. Anger, sadness, forgiveness, relief. But mostly, I'd felt tired. Tired of carrying the weight of our broken relationship. Tired of being angry. Tired of the whole complicated mess. "I don't forgive you," I'd said finally. "I don't think I ever will. What you did wasn't just a mistake or a moment of weakness. It was months and months of calculated betrayal. And then you tried to destroy the most important day of my life when you thought you might get caught." Emma had nodded, tears in her eyes but no attempt to argue or defend herself. "I know," she'd said. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But," I'd continued, "I don't hate you anymore either. I don't think about you very much, honestly. I've built a life that doesn't include you, and I'm happy with that life." We'd sat in silence for a few moments, two people who'd once shared everything now essentially strangers to each other. "I heard you got married," Emma had said finally. "David seems like a good man." "He is," I'd said. "He's nothing like Marcus." "I'm glad," she'd said, and she'd seemed to mean it. "You deserve to be happy." "Yeah," I'd agreed. "I do." Quote, 3 years later, as I write this story, I can say with certainty that exposing Emma and Marcus at my wedding reception was one of the best decisions I've ever made. It wasn't about revenge. It was about refusing to be a victim, about demanding that actions have consequences, about choosing truth over comfortable lies. Emma and I have never reconciled, but we've reached a kind of peace. She still lives in our hometown, working at a nonprofit and apparently building a quieter, more authentic life for herself. We don't speak, but we've stopped actively avoiding each other at family gatherings. It's not forgiveness, but it's not hostility either. It's simply acceptance that some relationships can't be repaired. Marcus remarried 2 years ago, not to Emma, as many people had speculated, but to someone he'd met in Chicago. I heard through mutual friends that his second wife is a kindergarten teacher, someone stable and predictable and safe. I hope he's learned to value those qualities instead of looking for excitement elsewhere. I also hope he's learned to be faithful, though that's not my concern anymore. As for me, I've built a life that's authentically mine. My event planning business continues to thrive, and I've found genuine satisfaction in helping other people celebrate the most important moments of their lives. David and I have been married for 2 years now, and we're expecting our first child in the spring. We have a beautiful home, 2 dogs who think they're children, and a circle of friends who choose to be in our lives rather than people who feel obligated by blood or history. Most importantly, I've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept betrayal. Sometimes standing up for yourself requires burning bridges. Sometimes the family you choose is more important than the family you're born with. The viral video still surfaces occasionally, usually around wedding season when people share stories about dramatic ceremonies or family conflict. Sometimes potential clients mention it when they contact me, either because they think it's funny or because they're impressed by how I handled the situation. I've learned to take it in stride. It's part of my story now, but it's not the only part. I don't regret exposing Emma and Marcus's affair in front of 500 people. I don't regret the public humiliation, the viral video, or the permanent consequences they've faced. They made choices that required witnesses, and I simply provided those witnesses with the truth. The only thing I regret is that it took me so long to see who they really were. But that's okay. Sometimes we need to lose everything we thought we wanted to discover what we actually need. Sometimes we need to have our hearts broken completely before we can learn to love ourselves enough to demand better. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living well despite the people who tried to destroy you. And that's exactly what I've done. The most beautiful part of my story isn't the dramatic wedding day revelation or the viral fame that followed. It's the quiet moments of happiness I've built since then. Sunday morning breakfast with David, planning celebrations for couples who genuinely love each other, the excitement of expecting our first child, the peace that comes from knowing I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Emma tried to take my happiness, but she failed. She took my first wedding, my naive trust, and my relationship with my twin sister. But she couldn't take my strength, my resilience, or my ability to build something better from the ashes of what she'd destroyed. In the end, that's what matters most. Not revenge, not justice, not even the vindication of being proven right. What matters is that I refuse to let their betrayal define me, refuse to let their choices limit my possibilities, and refuse to accept less than I deserved. I chose to fight back, to demand truth, and to build a life worthy of the person I've become. And I've never regretted that choice, not even for a moment. Sometimes the best stories aren't about getting what you want. They're about discovering what you actually need and having the courage to fight for it. This is that kind of story. This is my story. And I'm proud of how it turned out. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey through betrayal, revenge, and ultimately, redemption. This story of love, loss, and the strength to rebuild has been an emotional roller coaster from beginning to end. If you've been captivated by Sarah's journey from betrayal to triumph, Please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more compelling stories like this one. Share this video with anyone who loves dramatic storytelling and believes in the power of standing up for yourself. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest content, and let me know in the comments what you thought about Sarah's decision to expose the affair so publicly. Was it justified revenge, or did she go too far? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community, and I'll see you in the next incredible tale.